in the previous lesson I showed you how to use basic panel in Camera Raw, but of course Camera Raw, it's not all about basic panel. Of course it's giving you a lot of possibilities to edit your images, and of course that's the panel you're going to use the most, because I have to say, whether you retouch or do something different, mostly you use basic panel, especially to prepare for manipulation or retouching. You're going to use basic panel, and often that's the point when you end up the work with Camera Raw. However, Camera Raw has a lot of more options, so I'm going to show you the things that I think that are the most important in Camera Raw and you can use to edit your images. So we're going to go once again to Camera Raw. Let's hit filter and find Camera Raw filter. Okay, in this basic panel I'm going to change the settings just a little bit to make this image looks a bit better. For me, I'm going to pull up some of the exposure, some of the color. Maybe I'm going to pull up some of the contrast as well, but not really much. Something like this to make this a bit better for our future work. So the thing I want to show you in this lesson is the tone curve panel and the next panel about the details. We're going to talk about these two panels. So let's start from the tone curve panel. Of course, we're going to work with the tones, and the tone curve panel is about balance between the darkest point of the image, between the shadows, between the dark areas, and between the highlights, between the lights. So this is our curve, which is right now straight, so it's not really curved, but it will become curved when we're going to work with this. And of course you have three sliders over here, and they set up the balance between dark and the bright areas. I'm going to explain you this a little bit, but at first I need to work actually with the areas. So start once again. The first slider is responsible for the dark areas. So we can say it is responsible for the shadows and darks. That's our dark areas, and these are our darks and shadows. The slider on the middle over here is responsible for the midtones, and about the midtones we could say these are the darks and the lights. Depends in which area we're going to put this, is going to affect midtones with more influence or the pressure on darks or the lights. So these are our midtones, and of course the last one will be lights, highlights and lights. So we can actually place this somewhere over here, the darks, midtones, lights. I'm going to work with the darks, and when we move the slider over here you can see what is happening. I'm going to pull this right to bring up some of the lights. So I pull up the shadows and I brighten this up. As you can notice here, our curve went up a little bit, so that it means we bring up some of the lights in the dark areas, so in our shadows. Also, the other slider which is responsible for our darks, for our dark areas, is these darks. But as you can see, we're pulling up the curve nearly on the middle, but with more pressure for the dark areas. So it's our midtones also, but these ones which are a bit darker. Of course we can change the balance between these two, but right now that's the knowledge that is alright for you. And of course when we usually work with curves, we don't want to pull them up to brighten up some areas, or whether if our image is too dark, we're doing this, but not in this case. So usually we add a little bit of the shadow for the dark areas to make this a bit darker, a bit better looking. So we're going to set up some contrast. Also, I'm going to take down some of the darks, so you can actually see this curve. I just pull this up, down a little bit on the dark areas. The next point will be highlights and lights. And once again, when I'm pulling up the highlights, actually I'm brightening up just the highlights area, and you can see this on the curve. Also the same, if I'm going to do this with lights, have a look, I'm pulling this up and I'm actually brightening up huge part of the image like including midtones, but the bright areas of the midtones. Of course, it doesn't look well once again, so I'm going to take it down and I'm just going to brighten this up just a little bit on highlights. I think right now it's still too dark, so around this and a little bit, you can have a look, somewhere around 10 as well for the lights. So this curve has really nice soft shape. We brighten this up very softly. So I told you at the beginning about the balance between these two, and we have this mid-tone slider. So let's have a look what is happening when I'm going to pull this down. I change the range for the dark areas, for the shadows, into very small, so there's not really too much. And right now the lights area is really wide, so we actually brighten up. Most of the image is influenced by these two sliders, but there is not much of the shadows. The same is happening when I'm going to go down into the right side, and as you can see, I change the range and there is huge range for the dark areas, but not that much for the lights. So we're actually setting up the balance between the dark areas and white areas. Of course, I don't think it really looks great. You can see once again that's the really small space for the shadows, so it's mostly brightening up. It's really good to work like this when we have dark image and we wanted to brighten this up. We can actually set up huge space over here to brighten up the image. So that will be very useful, but not in this case when we have really nice image and we want just to improve a little bit of contrast. So I'm just going to pull this into the pretty much areas that was before. I want to be really careful right now. So around this we have really nice curve and we improve this really a lot. We set the balance between everything and that's something we like. And once again we can have a look for the preview. Let's press P on the keyboard, and that's before, that's after. You have to say it looks really impressive. However, the problem with the preview is when I'm turning this off, as you can see, we can see the preview of all of our panels. So the problem is how to see the preview just for this panel if we want to see how big progress we did, but keep the previous panel stays the same, or actually other panels. So to see the preview only for the one panel, we're going to press Alt or Option, Control or Command, and P. And right now we can see preview just for this panel, but this panel stays the same as we did this before. So that's something you need to notice. Let's go back. And also you can of course press over here to see the preview. However, I don't think you want to see this. You have a bit more option for the preview. You can split the image. You can see the preview for this panel over here, and you can see before and after by pressing this box over here. So that's before, that's our after. So that's the basic information for the tone curve, and I think that's really everything you need to know at this place. You have pressing this, you can see the preview before and after. So okay, that's the all information that you actually need to know about the tone curve. And right now we go into another section, which is detail, and this section might be a bit more complicated. And if I have to be honest, when I'm doing actually retouching, when I retouch the portrait images, I'm not using this detail section because I believe that sorting out the details is way better at the end of our retouching. And that's not just my opinion, but if you do some portrait retouching, leave the details, leave the sharpening on this place, and do this later in Photoshop. However, if you retouching the image like landscapes or the family images like the image you can see in front of you right now, it's really powerful tool to use. So I'm going to show you the basic thing about sharpening and noise reduction in Camera Raw right now. As you can see, the first part of our detail panel is sharpening. When we pull up the amount of sharpening into 150, its maximum possible sharpening. I'm just going to see how the looks preview, and it's not really much. You can see we are affected just a little bit of this jumper. We can maybe zoom this in. You're going to see this a little bit better. Once again, preview before and after. And the reason why is it very soft is the second slider. The radius is very low. What does it mean? The sharpening, what we build around very small areas. It's like 1 over here. The value is 1. If I'm going to pull this down, it will be even smallest areas. So the sharpening is building up around very small areas. That's why it's not so visible. What is happening when I'm pulling this radius even more? The sharpening is building around bigger areas, so automatically the sharpen is much more visible. Also, the next slider, which is our detail, can be very destructive if we want to use this smart. When we pull down the detail, as you can see, we actually nivelate the sharpening, and at this point we actually nivelated the details and we have really nice sharpening. However, when we're going to pull up the detail strongly, this might become a bit destructive, but I'm pulling everything up to show you how does it work. Of course, when we're going to work this for our project, we're not going to use maximum values because we usually don't want them. Of course, you can, but usually we're trying to find something really natural and something really beautiful and suitable for this image. However, even though you're going to decide to pull really such a strong sharpening, we have option like masking. So right now, imagine these all 3 sliders are your effect, your sharpening effect, your details, etc. So this effect is going through all of this area. However, we can nivelate this right now, and when we pull the 100, you can imagine that this effect is going somewhere here through the very small space, which actually doesn't exist, but through very small space, so it nivelates, the masking nivelate the effect that we put over here. You can see preview, and actually it's really difficult to notice. It masks nearly all of the image and it's not that visible. So we're going to, if you put strong effect, you can always mask the areas to not make this that strong. I'm going to keep the maximum values right now. It's really great example, but I'm going to mask most of this image and going to keep this very soft. So let's zoom this right now even more, because I need to show you a bit more details of the image. What happened, maybe I'm going to take down the mask even more, because that will be really great example for next part of this detail panel, which is noise reduction. So what you can notice right now, we have a lot of noise which we build up by this previous sharpening section, but this noise reduction section is really powerful if you want to work with the image which has too much noise. So I just built this up right now, and it's a really great example to show you how to do this, but actually we don't want to build up this noise which we made, but it often happens in photography on your images where you can notice a lot of noise. So how to sort this out? And we have 2 sliders, 2 main sliders, which is luminance and color. And luminance basically is the brightness, and it's mostly responsible for the details over here, and there's never such a huge affection on the color. So what I'm going to do, so luminance, our brightness. As you can see, when I'm pulling up the luminance, I'm actually reducing the noise from the face, and it's super powerful. My face is really smooth right now. And also we can work with luminance detail, which you're going to notice probably somewhere over here, because this area has some of the luminance. When I'm pulling this down, you're losing some luminance detail. As you can see, this image makes the impression of a bit of washed out, and when we pull this up, the details of the luminance become really strong once again. So to reduce the noise, of course you don't want this too much, and the luminance contrast won't be really so strong over here, but you can notice we're pulling this up, and on the luminance area, on the bright areas, actually you can notice it's building up the contrast, which might be again a bit of distractive. And we have the next part, which is actually color, but on this image, and it can be really powerful. However, even if I reduce the luminance over here, I don't have too much of the color noise on the image, as you can notice. But if you find your image, you can have a lot of color noise. It can be a little bit with the contrast over here. This color noise reduction can be really powerful tool for you. So I'm just going to go back over here a little bit. I can reduce the color noise a little bit by keeping the color noise at 50. It really helps. So even though if you cannot see such a huge difference, it really can do a nice job when we pull a color noise at 50. If we keep this at 50, it can do really job nicely. So I'm going to sort this out with luminance as before to reduce the noise I had before. So that's how it looks like. That's how we can work with the details in Camera Raw, how we can increase the sharpening, and that's how we can do the noise reduction in Camera Raw. These two panels are really powerful to increase the contrast, to improve the tones of the image, and also to improve the details if we want to have really amazing details. However, as you could notice, I'm not really huge fan of this detail slider because it can be really destructive for your image. And in the next lesson, we're going to talk about the rest of the panels in Camera Raw, which I believe can be very useful for your future work.